Anyway, yeah, this is part two. Last year I had the opportunity to present part one out there where you're all sitting now. And since then, yeah, let's go to, yeah, a little biographical update. I'm now the former staff historian with the Naval Historical Foundation. The foundation folded at the end of the year. And merged with the Naval Institute. So the Naval Institute's carrying on a lot of the foundation's recognition programs. One thing they're not carrying on is the book review program. Ever since the Naval Institute, they publish a lot of books. I handle that on a weekly e-letter called Thursday Tidings. I'm now doing the same thing with the National Maritime Historical Society. It's a publication called Tuesday Tidings. So it's a freebie. If you want to get a weekly update on what's happening in the naval history enterprise, just go to www.chistory.org and you can sign up and get the weekly e-letter. I'm looking for book reviewers, and if you have a book coming out, do send it to us. The instructions on how to send it are, within each edition of the newsletter. With that, I also want to throw out thanks to Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. They invested in my research through their Charles Lindbergh Chair of Aerospace History. And also thanks to the Naval Institute Press, because hopefully next year at this time, I'll be out there maybe doing a book signing. Now, the Institute Press is having issues with the title Fleet Air. They like the rest of it, but they're looking for something a little bit more snazzy. So if you guys have some idea of a real catchy title for this book about the Navy's first aircraft carrier, please share that with me. Two-part presentation. I'm going to do a quick recap of last year. Basically, we had the timeline. Spring 1919, the general board hearings talked about the need for aircraft carriers. We had a bunch of naval officers coming back from Europe, and they saw what the Brits were doing with their newly commissioned aircraft carriers, and the conclusion is we want some of those, but they weren't going to go all in on building one from the keel up. So what they wound up doing is picking the Jupiter. It was a Collier, and they authorized its conversion to a experimental aircraft carrier. 3 years later, the Langley is commissioned. It's not ready for commissioning. They just run out of funding from the Bureau of Construction and Repair. They had to use operational funds to finish the job. On September, the ship finally gets underway, and they have the first flight operations in October, takeoff, landing, first cat shot in November 22. December 22, I mentioned the U.S. fleet is formed. That's significant because the battle fleet is going to be on the West Coast, based up in San Pedro, and the scouting fleet is going to be based on the East Coast. And they come together. It forms the U.S. fleet. Langley is going to spend its first winter in commission down Pensacola to take advantage of warm weather down there. Now, as far as the future of Langley, there's some competing interest. There is Stanford Moses, who is the commander Air Squadron's battle fleet. He wants to have a nice fancy flagship out in San Diego. He's kind of lonely out there in North Island. He's just got a small airplane tender. Meanwhile, Kenneth Whiting, the XO of the Langley, he's all about experiments, testing out this platform. So he'd like to keep on the East Coast. And then you have William Moffett, the chief aeronautics. He's got his own issues. He's dealing with this guy, General Billy Mitchell, who would like to follow the British model, where they consolidated the Naval Air Service with the Army's service during World War I to create the Royal Air Force. That's Moffat's able to stave that off in part because Langley is sent on a public relations tour during the summer of 1923. Here you see a berth at the Washington Navy Yard. Happens to be in town for the Shriners Convention, and there's the Shriner-in-Chief, President Harding himself. Langley's going to continue. So the trip to Washington was so well received that the ship is sent up to New York and then up to Newport, Boston, Portland, Maine, and back down the coast. And eventually is going to wind up back in Pensacola for more flight experimentation through the spring of 1924. Has an opportunity to participate in Fleet Problem 2, involving attacking the Panama Canal with a small complement of aircraft, and also an amphibious exercise off Puerto Rico. Has to go back to Norfolk. If you notice here, there's like one stack. It had exhaust issues. They worked to resolve that in this yard period. And finally, in November of 1924, the Langley passes through the Panama Canal to arrive in San Diego. This is a headline that Admiral Moffett must have just loved, the deadliest ship afloat. Hardly is the case, but it's kind of prescient of what was to come. So settling in 1925, you can see Langley's their birth there at North Island, getting to know the local population. VF2 air squadron, fighter squadron, Nathan Chase, the CO, embarks. He in June is going to be lost in an aircraft accident over Hawaii. He's going to be replaced by Spiggs Weed, who's kind of unique in his own regard. He's going to be injured in a domestic. He falls down the stairs the following year and is paralyzed, but he's going to become a very popular script writer for Hollywood movies, some of them involving the Langley. So he's a colorful character. Actually going to be played by John Wayne in a movie in the 1950s. So is involved in a rescue operation. There is a patrol plane that's trying to go to Hawaii, doesn't quite make it, and Langley's sending out aircraft in search for that wayward aircraft, which eventually is found by a submarine. Off to Mare Island for some more repairs. Bull Reeves, Joseph Mason Reeves, arrives as the new Air Squadron's battle fleet, and he has some connection with the Langley in that he was the first CO of the USS Jupiter. Here you see Jupiter fitting out up in Mare Island. He was commissioning a CO, so he knows about the ship's unique characteristics. It has a electric propulsion plant versus your steam turbine. So electric drive, two screw ship. It gets the ship up to about 15 knots, which is suitable for what we needs to do. He has his famous 1001 question speech, and basically he's challenging the pilots for Air Squadron's battle fleet. There's a lot we need to learn before we can be capable of being an asset to the fleet. So we got to become a school before we can become an Air Force, and that school is going to be the Langley. Unfortunately, not everybody sees eye to eye with what he's trying to do, particularly this guy, the commander-in-chief of the battle fleet, Charles E. Hughes. He was nicknamed the Walrus for obvious reasons. However, fortunately, he has an aide on his staff, a Lieutenant Commander Patrick N. Bellinger, who is kind of like an airplane whisperer. He says, you really ought to let this guy, Reeves, try some of the things he's trying to do, because he's not being unreasonable here. So Hughes relents, and actually he's going to be rewarded, because what the aviators on Langley doing like Fleet Problems number 6, where you simulate a rescue of the Philippines, is the aircraft, they perform as advertised. You have some newbies coming on board. John Towers, the aviator number 3, reports on board as the XO. Frank Wagner becomes a CO of the Air Squadron. He's going to, these two individuals are going to, we're going to see them in the later with Langley. And in the case, of course, we're getting better at more capable aircraft. And during this summer of during 1927, it's going to be mostly away. There's Fleet Problem 7 in the Caribbean. That was brought up earlier. I guess Germany was a simulated enemy there. East Coast port calls in New York. There's exercises off of New England. It returns in June. Reeves is promoted to Rear Admiral and reclassifies as Langley as an operational vice experimental carrier. So, Langley is now, in direct support of battle fleet operations. There's a lot of tensions between Reeves and Towers. Towers is looking after his aviators. He's worried that Reeves is kind of like really pushing the limits as far as the number of aircraft trying to perform. There is in December there's an avgas fire. If the flames had reached the main tank, this would be the end of the story. But fortunately, quick thinking from the enlisted kept the flames. There was one fatality, but due to the damage, the early part of 1928, Langley's going to be spending up in Mare Island, to get some structural repairs. This is where you have the tension between Reeves and Towers, because it's prior to another fleet problem where Reeves is really insisting on, we can really cram like 2 fighter squadrons and a scouting squadron on board, upwards of 42 aircraft. And Reeves actually goes up in deck and kind of shows Towers where you can place all these to fit all these airplanes, and they deploy with this load. Fleet problem 8 is the battle problem that never was. And this is a case where Admiral Day, who had the scouting fleet, which had moved from the East Coast and came out of San Diego, was supposed to intercept the battle fleet commanded by Admiral de Steiger. And Day, his navigator says, de Steiger is slow as ship. It's an auxiliary, can only make 8 knots. So they did a speed of advance across the Northern Pacific, and they figured out this is when they're going to arrive at Pearl Harbor, not counting on the fact that de Steiger would take these slow auxiliary ships under tow and make a greater speed of advance. So when the Day's scouting force fleet arrived at Pearl Harbor, the battle fleet was there waiting for them. So that ended the problem. But while they were there, there was a joint Army-Navy defense trial, and this is where you have your first simulated attack. It was a surprise attack. It was mentioned earlier that Lexington with King is going to be given the yellow card because he's going to perform the same feat later. But here you have 35 aircraft starting at 4:30 in the morning, launching an aircraft every 12 seconds. The whole flight deck is gone in 7 minutes. So, so that is, that's quite impressive for this, small carrier, which, by the way, at this time has picked up the nickname the Covered Wagon because of its appearance. Norman Freeman, who's in the room, shared this, and he mentioned this earlier today in his talk. This is why at Midway, 3 carriers with nearly the same had nearly the same capacity as 4 Japanese. So, and this is what Reeves got. This is the ability to pack a punch. So that's the end of the, our wrap, our preview part now for part two. Yeah, Lexington arrives at the end of this, and Reeves comes back on Lexington. So, but Lexington and Saratoga, the two converted battle cruisers, they can't fit at the San Diego homestead. San Diego Harbor is not deep enough to accommodate the two new carriers, so they're up in San Pedro. So Langley still is San Diego's aircraft carrier, and because it's at North Island, which is the the headquarters for the air squadrons out on the West Coast, Langley is going to continue on as like the training qual carrier. So a lot of the pilots who make names for themselves during World War II have their first flight deck landings on board the Langley. 1929, the ship is going to head down off of Panama, drop Marines at Nicaragua en route, and meet up with Lexington and Sarah, and go up the East Coast, return, picks up more Marines, drops them off. Reeves is going to be relieved by Rear Admiral Henry V. Ty Butler, who's not very popular with the enlisted troops because he insists on having the trousers with the laced up in a certain way. Summer continues to pilots. David Ingalls is the Navy's first ace. World War I. He is now the Assistant Secretary of Navy for Aviation. And he visits, and he likes to fly around the country doing inspections of his own airplane, and he takes the opportunity to take off from the carrier while in port. Spends the end of the year Puget Sound. The three carriers actually are up there in that area for overhauls. Here's a kind of a rear picture of the three of them together. Just a side note, while they were up there, Lex got pulled away to go down to Tacoma. Hydroelectric power, there was a drought, there was a lack of hydroelectric power. Lexington was employed to generate electricity for the city of Tacoma for a little bit. So just a side note there. 1930, more carrier calls, and for fleet problem 10, Battle of the Navassa Sea. This is, I wrote about this once in Sea Power magazine. This is kind of, we talked about Coral Sea as the first battle between fleets where they don't come inside of each other. It's an air-on-air combat. Well, this is, I wrote that this was really the first fleet confrontation where, the battleships didn't come in contact. And this was for the Blue Force Sarah and Langley versus the Black Force Lexington. It was one-sided. Unfortunately, this was not a good day for the Blue Fleet. Lexington was hidden by a cloud, and scouting aircraft from Lexington were able to find Saratoga and Langley and take both of them out. And this is what happens when you lose your air cover. The aircraft from Lexington were able to engage the Blue Battle Fleet and set up a, when they finally did come the climatic battle line clash, it was just lopsided for Black. So because Black had the aviation support, big lesson learned there. Norfolk Navy Yard, a new CO, Rufus Zogbaum, who was the former gun boss on the Pennsylvania. Why is this significant? Because as the gun boss on the Pennsylvania, he was called up and said, you need to build a deck because we're going to have this guy, Eugene Ely, do a test landing on board. So Zogbaum was responsible for building the flight deck, and they had to come up with a way to stop the aircraft. So they came up with the sandbag and ropes, this cable trap system that, and we still use today, a little bit more sophisticated today though. The drawing up on the left-hand side Zogbyung's father was a well-known artist, illustrator, and that's one of his works. So the Zogbyung name was very well known out in his he had a reputation of being a very artsy guy. One of the interesting, while he was CEO, we again had Ingalls come on board, except this time Ingalls wanted to get carrier qual. He brought along Will Rogers, and so it set up a very interesting case where they went out and they qualled Ingalls. But this, before the briefing, is there anything I got to remember? And it says, yes, remember you have to lower your hook. And sure enough, on his first approach, Ingalls forgot to lower his hook. So they waved them off, and they waved them off again, and they waved them off again. And finally, as one of the enlisted guys just wrote hook on a chalkboard and waved it at him. And then he realized, oh my goodness, Rogers was just, he was falling beside himself. He never laughed so hard. But give Ingalls his credit, he got his carrier quals in. So I don't know if you're the CNO and you're everybody was very concerned. Reeves, that the Assistant Secretary of the Navy somehow crashing, it would have been a very bad day. Here's a quote from Will Rogers. Saturday in San Diego, our crack boys from the aircraft carriers Langley, Lexington, and Saratoga made aerial whoopee for Mr. Ingalls. 31, more exercises. There is the saga of Chief Air Pilot Vern Harshman. You could be enlisted and get qualified to be a pilot, and there are quite a few of the Langley pilots were enlisted pilots, the chief air pilot. In this case, Harshman was flying with a few of his aircraft. They flew into a cloud, and he was the only plane to fly out of the cloud. And eventually, he lost the carrier, and he had to ditch. And the fleet searched for him for a couple of days and gave up. Fortunately, he was picked up by a German tramp steamer. This was big news, though. The New York Times was covering this. Nations, about the saga of Chief Air Pilot Harshman. When it was found, it was like national celebration during a time period which, quite frankly, during the Depression, the nation needed some good news. So that was a well-followed event. Additional exercises. There was some concern that, with these big deck carriers, Lexington and Saratoga, which were, we agreed to convert these battle cruisers, that, maybe we built too big flight decks. And, the thinking was in future carrier designs, we're going to make them a little smaller so we can, spread out, we don't have the backbone of our fleet knocked out, in one carrier attack. So, detached for the scouting force. Yeah, Langley was supposed to go to the Atlantic side, and the Lexington and Saratoga would stay with the battle of, it's now been renamed the Battle Force and Scouting Force. And there is a new CEO, Aubrey Fitch, and while on the East Coast, they experiment. They bring on board an autogyro, the predecessor of the helicopter. Kenneth Whiting, the first XO, conducted test landings. And there's bombings of the USS Pittsburgh. They were doing some, testing of ordnance on this recently decommissioned U.S. Navy Armored cruiser, which you may have recognized. It previously was the USS Pennsylvania, the ship that, of course, we had the Eli's first aircraft on. Wrapping up 1931, Yorktown for the 125th anniversary of Yorktown. Langley joins with the USS Constitution, along with French cruisers and a lot of fleets, scouting force units up just up from Norfolk, for this big event, and then up to Maine for cold weather exercise. The only problem is for the first week, there was no cold weather. So they kind of had to wait it out. And finally, they got to the cold weather so they could, test how you could, conduct flight operations in less than optimal conditions. To the West Coast Fleet Problem 13, nominal role, tactical exercises off of San Pedro with the battle fleet. The big question was, and it was the buzz in the newspapers, was with active combat occurring in China off Shanghai between the Japanese and the Chinese, was the Navy going to deploy Langley to Manila? And everybody thought so. It was kind of a fate, but it didn't happen. Okay. Patrick Bellinger thought he was going to take command in Manila. Instead, he takes command at Mare Island. Yeah, he was a very popular Commander Bellinger. He brought a Kikamaju as the ship's mascot, as the pet. The problem was that the Kikamaju ran down into the engineering spaces and kind of bit the hands of all the snipes down there. So the Kikamaju wound up in the San Diego Zoo. Instead, they're going to get a cat, Minnie the Moocher, to be the new ship's mascot. The decision was for Langley to stay with the battle fleet, with the battle force on the West Coast. Interesting, Langley gets to work with the USS Utah, which has been converted into a remote control target ship. Langley's a support ship doing this conversion. Is part of the Blue Fleet during Fleet Problem 14 in San Francisco. Here is a case where there was a sighting of the Saratoga with a flight deck full of aircraft, and Richmond sent them the sighting report encrypted. By the time Langley decrypted report, Saratoga was able to get its aircraft off. Otherwise, Langley would have been over in time to take out Saratoga. Instead, it was Langley that got taken out. So that was a lesson learned from that fleet exercise. Tactical exercises in March. Langley was in San Pedro for the major quake and provided humanitarian relief. April 4th, it's notable that Akron goes down off of New Jersey, and we lose Rear Admiral Moffett. New CO is arguably, some folks say, the first CO, because he was the commissioning CO. He was acting CO when the ship was commissioned in 1922. But Ken Whiting is now the CO. He's only CO for 6 months, though. There was an incident in November the 15th. The carrier moved from where it was operating from without communicating that with the squadron. So a bunch of planes had to ditch. He's detached. He's going to become the PXO of the Ranger. So he's relieved by Warren Child, who is the was one of his relief as the XO, and the XO is Virgil Griffin, who was the first to pilot to actually lift off from the Squash Griffin. Was the first pilot. Now he's the XO of the ship. So back at Mare Island, Minnie the Moocher, the mascot, disappears. They suspect that a nurse crossing the deck from a hospital ship may have absconded with Minnie the Moocher. Fleet Problem 15 takes it down to Panama and the Caribbean, and then up to New York for FDR's review of the fleet. Then to the Norfolk Navy Yard. They lose their scouting squadron to the Ranger. It's the scouting squadron is replaced by 2 Marine scouting squadrons. Goes into the yard next to the reef, and lo and behold, Minnie the Moocher returns aboard, and the mascot is returned. So half a country, full country away, we have our mascot back. 1935, carrier calls, Ranger arrives. Now, guess who has prime real estate now at North Island? Langley finds itself now having to anchor out a lot. There is fleet problem 36. This is it proposes what would have happened if the Japanese captured Midway and the Aleutians. So this is kind of there's some foresight with the thinking of these fleet problems. And this is kind of what I was asking Norman earlier about, the interrelationship between this and the wargaming. Yeah, Langley plays a escort role for the main body going to Hawaii. So, and the Marine aircraft attached, they do a lot of anti-submarine work. New CO is it comes aboard. Also in 35, they have Frank Akers does a blind landing. They put they cover the cockpit, and he comes in by radio control. So that's of course he gets an air medal for that, and he well deserved it. 1936, back to Mare Island, fleet problem 17, 4 carriers off of Panama. And this is the note that Bull Reeves is now the commander of U.S. Fleet, and he's really big on tradition. So he takes the whole fleet across the equator and Neptune to hold record initiation. So there was some how many. Something like 29. Yeah, there it is. 29,751 polywogs. There is actually footage of the initiation ceremonies in the National Archives of what occurred on board the Langley. So it's very interesting to look at. Hugh Douglas, he was a stud at the Naval Academy for the football team. He has the privilege of transfer the metamorphosis from aircraft carrier to the aircraft tender. So the ship is being transferred from the battle force to the base force, which base force takes care of like the patrol aircraft. And Rear Admiral Ernest King makes the Langley his flagship, and he's not exactly the most popular officer. There's some interesting sea stories about his gruffiness on board. Last launch on October the 25th of 1936, and then it goes into Mare Island, where the front of the a third of the flight deck is peeled off. The pilot house sees sun for the first time in 15 years, and it's now a seaplane tender to take care of these new airplanes coming online, these Catalinas. And as Norman talked about, they were PBYs. The idea is that these planes would also serve as a bombing role. So you needed a ship big enough to able to hold these things out of water. And this is, Langley was perfect for this role compared to the other aircraft tenders in the fleet, which were designed to take care of smaller aircraft. Fleet problem 18. They wind up in San Francisco for the opening of, and this is a big deal, the opening of the Golden Gate Bridge. And Langley's there, has a primo seat to watch the fleet come in from Hawaii. 1937. Langley is scouting out, staking out potential seaplane bases. They build one up at Sitka, goes down to Pearl Harbor, operates at French Frigate Shoals past Midway, then goes down to Panama, El Salvador, San Diego to support seaplane operations. Fleet problem 19. Langley heads out to Johnston Island to set up a seaplane base. Change of command, Captain George Murray. Captain Murray is going to be, I think he is going to have command of the Enterprise at the Battle of Midway, and he'll be yeah, he'll be a task force commander in the Guadalcanal campaign. Returns to Sitka, Hawaii, and Mare Island to receive new boilers. Fleet problem 20 in the Caribbean. There's a boiler, one of those new boilers explode. Okay, but the ship Langley is still capable of operating from Sonoma Bay in the Dominican problem to provide support for the seaplanes operating in this fleet problem. Up in March for repairs, and then it's to New York to participate in the opening of the New York World's Fair. Back to the after the fleet review, it's back to San Diego for a very short pit stop in July of 1939, just enough time to take on board stores. And as VP-21's flying ahead, new CO's Arthur Davis, they head out. They're going to be heading out to Pearl Harbor, okay, with the intent of being stationed out there for a certain amount of time, but then the Germans invade Poland, and orders are cut shortly thereafter to deploy to Manila. So as a response, the concern is, of course, with the Europeans engaged, declaring war in Germany, the British and Dutch are not going to be resourcing their assets in the Pacific. So the United States needs to send additional reinforcements to the Philippines. Frank Wagner is now the CO, and there is Stump who's going to relieve him. Here you see a picture of the Langley in the lower left-hand side is in the Dewey dock, a floating dry dock that's at Subic Bay. During the time that Langley is out in the Philippines, they're traveling. The ship is traveling around the archipelago, dropping off cans of fuel and setting up potential secret seaplane landing sites in anticipation that action against the Japanese. And a lot of these facilities are going to be helpful when war does break out. The bigger picture is you can see Langley there berthed at Sangley Point in Manila Bay. War is declared. Well, yeah, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, which is December 8th. The weather in Manila prevented the Japanese from attacking that day, and that gave Langley and a pair of oilers an opportunity to get out and head south. So Langley's able to escape. Spends New Year's in Darwin, leaves Darwin just before the Japanese, launch a devastating air raid on that northern Australian base. McConnell relieves Stump as the CO and is sent to Fremantle. And this is, I guess, some controversy here about the idea, okay, Java needs support. The assessment basically is Java's a lost cause, but it's it's the Dutch government there. It's send us help. So we relent and we decide to put a bunch of P-40s on the remaining deck as a use the ship as an air transport. Unfortunately, the mission fails. Langley is caught in daylight by Japanese naval aviation, and it takes 5 bomb hits. Not much casualties. The crew gets off the ship and actually has to be torpedoed. To scuttle the ship. The tragedy is that much of the crew then is evacuated on the tanker, the oiler Pecos, and Pecos is then attacked by Japanese aircraft and is sunk with heavy loss of life. So, so that's it. Questions I welcome, and if you need to contact me, that is. I teach strategy and war for the Naval War College, so that's my Naval War College yeah, USNWC, there should be an EDU at the end there. So David.Winkler at USNWC.edu. So with that, that kind of, I guess, brings your day to a close.